Well, I was born on the 4th of March, 1937, so 2 years before the Second World War broke out, and I was born in the town of Sevenoaks, which is in Kent. So I can fairly call myself a Kentish maid. My father had a business in London. Where they lived was right in the path of the German bombers. So when I was 2, they decided that it really was not a very safe location. So they moved to the north of London, to Hertfordshire. Until nearing the end of the war, we moved to a far larger house, which was called Tapmore Place. It was Eastern Headquarters Command. During the war, had Britain been invaded and the Allies been forced to retreat north of London, this was to have been where Ike's headquarters were. Well, that never happened, but you can imagine when my brother and I, who was a rather salacious 13-year-old, and I was just under 10, when we moved to Tapmore, I remember the first day we went there, he said, "Margaret, come up here, come up here." There was Jane Russell and Lana Turner, and all the American pin-ups were all over the walls. And he thought he'd died and gone to heaven. Loved it. But I remember, I think, to this day, there's a certain kind of alarm that I cannot hear without going right back to childhood in Britain, because it was the same sound as the air raid siren warning you that a bombing raid was about to come. I didn't do too well academically at school until this same headmistress, Vivian Alice Prain, she discovered that I loved history. She thought that I could take the advanced history exam before any of the others. So she gave me solo lessons. And she inculcated in me an abiding love of history. And it's to her that I owe that. And it's to her that I owe my presence at Edinburgh University. And I loved Edinburgh. It's known as East Windy and West Endy.
East Windy,
yes,
Windy and West
and West Endy for its snobbishness. But I loved it. It was a great 3 years. And then my father said, "You need to go to work." And so there was a very superior female called Miss Thorne, who came round and interviewed everybody. And I said I wanted to be a geologist, and she said, "You can't possibly be." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, girls can't pee over the side of a boat." And so there we were.
Oh, Margaret.
But I did land up at Shell International, but in a secretarial role. Then went to London and shared a flat with a girl, and so lived the life in London. And then I get this call from my mother saying, in those tones that only mothers can have, "There's this awfully nice boy, the son of your father's patent lawyer, and he's living in Bath, but he's come to London, and he doesn't know anybody, and would you please invite him to dinner?" Brown then arrived at the station wearing an Inverness cape. You don't, in those days in England, you didn't, unless you were extremely eccentric as a young man, go around in an Inverness cape. He looked like Sherlock Holmes personified. But however, he charmed my parents, and eventually 4 years later in Paris, he managed to charm me. Came to America to live, and then eventually came out to Waterford in January of '67.
So
it was just such a charming little town. And it had much more of a mix of newcomers, or the children of newcomers, who'd started coming out after the end of the war, and the old farming families that were still there. There was interest in Brown's office, the National Park Service, to single out Waterford. That what makes Waterford rare is the architectural significance of the buildings within it, and then the 1,300 acres around it, of which much is still in open farmland and open land.
You look at the front of our house, it's got a central door in the middle and a window on each side and 3 windows across on the second floor. It's just as if you put a child down with a pencil and a crayon and say, "Draw a house," they draw our house.
and Brett was there, and he moved away from Waterford, but kept tabs. We knew each other. But in the early 90s, Brett came roaring through town, and he said, "How would you like to do a spot of writing?" And I said, "Why not?" I knew I could write. I loved to write. Yes, and Brett at that time, when he accosted me on the street, he was editor, publisher, and owner of Leesburg Today, that there needed to be a newspaper that kept tabs on local government to make sure that governments were doing their correct job. And we have endeavored to live by that. And so I worked under Brett and with Norman, and then Norman Steyer succeeded Brett as editor and publisher. So those two were very much my mentors. Brett and Norman then, in 2002, asked me to start covering Western Loudoun towns. But I think the role then, and still today, for me has been to cover local government fairly, objectively, honestly, and to present both sides of an issue, always. And I always used to say, if you're a reporter, you don't really pick up, you don't get your jollies so much from the huge pay that you take to the bank.
That's true.
You get it from emails and comments and phone calls and letters that say, "I really liked your story." And for me personally, it's very important that they say, "That was very balanced, that was very fair. I may not have agreed with your conclusions, but you presented both sides of the story." It's very interesting starting over again. And the other day, when Loudoun Now was named Best New Business by the town of Leesburg, I wrote a note to those of us who are survivors from the old Leesburg Today. That in a way, it's every cloud does have a silver lining, because had we not been closed as Leesburg Today and restarted as Loudoun Now, we would not have been in a position to win any awards as a new business. I love to write. Specifically, I love to write about this community of Loudoun, which I think is one of the most fabulous places to live in. I've seen in my near 50 years here, I've seen enormous change. But you know, for all that some older people bemoan such an influx, all the new people who come into Loudoun bring their own talents, their own experiences, so they make Loudoun an even richer tapestry. I suppose I was only about 6 or 7 or something like that, quite young. And I used to have to go to school at Hitchin Girls Grammar School on the bus, a journey of about 8 miles, on the public bus. And my mother discovered when I came home on the final day of school that I had filched 5 shillings, from somebody's locker. And she was furious with me. She upbraided me. She said, "You are getting right back on that bus, on the next bus. You are taking that money, you are going back to school, you are giving it to the headmistress." And I did. I went all the way back in and I gave the money back. And that was an absolute watershed for me, as young as I was. And from that incident, developed my own understanding that there were certain lines one should not ever cross. Even if it was uncomfortable, one should decide what the Rubicon is, if you like, for oneself, and just not cross it. Brown and I are so very different. He has soaring visions. I'm very much a pick up your foot and take one step at a time, one step at a time. And in fact, I've said on my tombstone, I want two sayings. All she ever wanted was an adverb or two. And the other one is, he gave me wings and I gave him feet. One of the things that I'm proudest about in what has come to be quite a career in journalism is that many of my readers seem to feel there is that sense of honor and of being careful with the truth. Being truthful has been enormously important with me. I used to say to my children, just tell the truth.